It is 19 hours 30 all across this beautiful country that we call Guyana. And Guyana, it is time to enter room 592, where it is currently packed. We have a full house this evening. And this evening, at the helm of the program, as usual, Dr. Yog Mahadeo alongside his co-host, senior journalist of Kaieteur News, Mr. Leonard Gildarie. The guests this evening, Ms. Rondha-Ann Lam, alongside Bishop Juan Edghill and Timothy Jonas. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening to you, Mr. Kevin Smith, and good evening to the entire Kaieteur Radio technical team working hard behind the scenes. So while we say good evening to you, Kevin, don't feel that we are forgetting Raj, Joshua, and everybody else there at Kaieteur Radio Land. And so, Leonard, good evening to you too. Ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're joining us from, all across Guyana, the Caribbean, we're getting a feedback. Can you guys mute your mic? Yes, thank you. So wherever you're joining us from, ladies and gentlemen, all across Guyana, the Caribbean, and the wider world, welcome to room 592, where we unleash the truth. Tonight we have our guests, Ms. Rondha-Ann Lam, Mr. Timothy Jonas, and Bishop Juan Edghill. And our discussion tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is to negotiate or not to negotiate. It seems like it is a very simple question. The question comes against the backdrop of the APNU-AFC making a release at about a week and a half ago saying that maybe they are open to negotiations and discussion. And in the same paragraph, they said that they see peace and unity and so forth of the country as of paramount importance. In that backdrop, therefore, we do know that a number of the political parties in Guyana would have made various statements about whether they're open or not open to negotiations. Now, not open to negotiations doesn't mean that they're not open to discussions and negotiations, period. It just probably is relating to a prevailing circumstance. And that is what we need to get down to tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just inform everyone that I had asked Mr. Lennox Schumann to join us here tonight, and he did call to apologize that he was on his way to one of the communities in the interior, and so that he could not join us. And let me also say that an email was sent to the Prime Minister's office to request a participation from that office, and there has been no acknowledgement of that email. So, ladies and gentlemen, we shall get into our discussion tonight. And we are going to look at this entire topic of discussion / negotiation. And in that backdrop, let me therefore remind you that Moses Nagamutu, as of the start of this week or the end of last week, he reiterated the call for negotiation, saying that APNU-AFC remains open for dialogue and for negotiations. And the APNU-AFC has started to talk about not just dialogue, but they have started to talk about shared governance. What does it mean to the political landscape? We are going to have that discussion with our guests tonight. And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to, they say ladies first, and with due respect to our guest tonight, Ms. Rondha-Ann Lam, I would like Rondha to solicit your opinion on this call for negotiation, call for dialogue, call for shared governance. And, you know, we're going to have an open discussion on this all tonight. But over to you, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. Is this negotiation to deal with ending this process and installing the legitimately elected government? Because officially, you know, we've had an election. We're heading into 5 months post-elections with multiple court cases, multiple attempts to block a number of things. You know, on Thursday, we're expecting new, you know, the results for a new court case again, an appeal of that one. So my position, and I think almost all of the panelists tonight will probably be similar to that. This is me, of course, just being facetious here in that sense. If we're having a conversation about how to end this process and to end it according to the law and based on the results of the will of the people, then absolutely we can have this conversation. Conversations about shared governance in its current form, at least as how I interpret it, coming from APNU-AFC. There are no provisions in law for it at the moment. However, we cannot ignore the fact that APNU-AFC represents a large proportion of the Guyanese population as well. Therefore, conversations can come after we would have installed the government elected by the people, and then we can move towards things like constitutional reform, which would ensure that all Guyanese are represented within the power sphere, and we can go from there. That's my official position on these calls for discussion and dialogue, and especially shared governance.
Thank you. Tim, I want to come to you next on the same question, and to also elicit your comments on the following. When ANOG and TCI and TNM and Bishop and the PPPC, when you guys went to the polls, the electorate at that stage did not envisage that one of the parties would say, hey, before we hand over power, we need to talk about shared governance. So kindly include that in your thinking, sir, as I ask you for your comment. You're muted, sir. Kindly unmute. Yes.
You say that people are taken by surprise by what's happened, and people didn't envisage that this would be the outcome. Freddie Kissoon wrote an interesting article the other day in the Kaieteur News, where he pointed out that among the most ordinary and most humble of Guyanese was the very clear perception that proved right. Very many people on one side of the fence that are absolute PPP loyalists, and these are the most humble and ordinary salt of the earth folk, were very clear. And I remember they said the same thing to me. You support these people, as I did then. If they get in, they'll never come back out. And that was a crystal clear statement that was made without any bells and whistles, without any nice words to make it sound nice. And it has proved to be true. So I don't think that we can speak for what the average Guyanese envisaged. They obviously had a clarity of vision that some of us did not have. Now, speaking for myself, when Mr. Granger rejected the first list of 6 nominees for chairman of the Elections Commission, I began to worry at that stage. You don't play with the Constitution like that. And as soon as he did that, I felt something was wrong and something was going to be wrong. But here we are in the middle of a mess. And it is going to take time to heal, but you cannot begin to heal when the rigging knife is still stuck in you. You got to deal with that problem first. So you have to remove the issue, the instrument that is causing the harm, before you begin to discuss how to change the system going forward. And right now, what is causing the harm is the attempt by one party to falsify and rig an election.
Thank you, Tim. Bishop. Yeah, I know. Bishop, I'll tell you something, Bishop. God bless their souls. Mr. Feroz Muhammad and Mr. Komal Chand, 2 stalwarts of the PPP. I remember in 2014, they said something to me. And you know, Tim, you just jerked my memory right back to that day when they both over coffee were telling me, Yog, when PNC gets into office, they will never come out. It's gonna take a long time and a lot of work to get them out. You are right, Tim, in hindsight. These men were right, and Guyanese are now seeing that. Bishop, over to you, sir. Are you going to negotiate?
Well, Yog, good evening, and good evening to all your other guests and your viewers and listeners. The issue is, number one, you do not negotiate an election result. You declare an election result. And we are at a stage where we have an election that is not complete. Nowhere in the world, under any circumstance, in any democracy, do you negotiate the results of an election. What the people of Guyana want is a declaration of the results of the elections. Secondly, it would appear that the PNC-led APNU-AFC have mastered the art of thinking privately and acting publicly. They have learned how to say all the right things. But when you check the fruit of the tree, it's a poison olive. The last statement by Harman, and then the conversations by Ramjatan, and then Moses' article is tantamount to political blackmail. If you want stability, then you got to come to the table and talk to us. And I said earlier, you don't negotiate an election result. The PPPC believes in negotiations, believes in dialogue, believes in the night of the 21st of December 2018, when we won the no confidence vote. The first thing that Dr. Barajagio did as leader of the opposition was to go over to Joseph Harman and said, we need to talk. If you go back to his speech on the floor that night, after all the hurrah and the baloo, that was about this offers an opportunity for us to talk and for us to be able to move Guyana forward. When the Granger come to the table in the name of wanting to talk and discussions, when they had already filed their court cases, when they had already started their propaganda war about 34 and Charandas and fraud and all the rest of it. So when you got to the table, hear what he's going to say at the discussion time. Well, we have to give the courts an opportunity to rule. I was in the room with Dr. Jagdeo, so I can tell you his demeanor and actual words. He was actually saying, well, we are prepared to follow the rules. And here it is, we have a citizen who is challenging what has taken place, and we have to wait for that. So they have learned to think privately and act publicly. We will not succumb to political blackmail. And let me put it on the record, at all material times, whether it is with the APNU-AFC, the other small parties, civil society, including the labor movement, religious organizations, and other NGOs, the PPP in or out of government, we are committed to dialogue, engagement of stakeholders, and discussions that will chart the way forward for Guyana. And that's our position.
Thank you, Bishop. Indeed, sir, you cannot negotiate the results of an election. Rhonda, I want to come back to you on the following point. Guyana is in a stalemate, ma'am. We have a situation, a potential. I know Tim might smile when I say this because he sees these things with a clairvoyance that normally I don't. But Rhonda, Guyana is in a position presently where after this election, after this case goes to, if it goes to the CCJ, there might be another case and another one and another one. We also have the potential, ma'am, where they might find somebody to challenge Claudette Singh's ability to declare or not declare. All kinds of things are possible. Therefore, are we, by having a position of not wanting to discuss, are we therefore shutting the door on a resolution? If that is the only way to get them out of office or get things happening in Guyana, are we shutting the door by taking this position now?
I'm going to remind our listeners and our viewers as well of the Cummingsburg Accord. This is a scenario and a situation whereby there was an agreement within, you know, the APNU-AFC coalition of the larger partners within that coalition of their own approach to how they would divvy up the spoils, so to speak. And we had the president just immediately after that accord was signed, sounding, you know, these kinds of warning bells that even though AFC would have Mr. Ramjatan as the prime ministerial candidate, you know, the president kept saying things like, at least I interpreted it as that, and many other persons did, you know, he can choose whomever he wants as prime minister. So my position is simply this. If within their own active coalition, you had stalemates, you had stallings, and this is within a group of partners, more or less, I'm not absolutely convinced that the call for conversation and the calls for dialogue is genuine. That's how I feel from the time I heard it, and that's a position I maintain right now. When it comes to Guyana, we have an unfortunate problem of looking for judicial solutions to political problems. I keep saying this over and over again. I sound like a stop record. We are not mature when it comes to politics in this country. And it is squarely at the foot of the political past we've had. And therefore, if we set the precedent in 2020 of negotiating elections results, we are setting a precedent that whichever party, whether it comes, you know, I've talked to persons who said they're afraid that we'll never see another set of elections that could even be remotely considered, you know, free and fair. Therefore, we would set a precedent of persons just willy-nilly. I don't like the results, it doesn't favor me, and therefore I'm just going to hold the country to ransom. This is the time where we have to stand up and say enough is enough. We went into those boxes, we saw the will of the people, and we have to respect it. Everybody talks about constitutional change. Nobody does it because it suits them when they're in power. People only want power sharing when they've lost. And this is what it is. And I frankly do not and cannot agree. And therefore, we will hold out. We have to, because the precedents that we'll be setting is dangerous for this country. I don't like the rules that I have to play by. Therefore, I'm just going to, whenever I don't feel like playing with those rules, I'm just going to throw the whole bathwater out with the baby and be done with it. There is a procedure. We keep harping about this constitution. This is a time we have to follow it. A lot of our people won't like it. Half of the population will not. But that's how the cookie crumbles literally at this point. Perhaps this will be the time when we're able to make true constitutional change to have all of our people represented. But as it is right now, I would say to people, we have to resist this. This is not going to set a nice precedent for the future if we allow it to happen.
Great. Thank you, Rhonda. Kim, is it just a matter of lack of trust that you would feel that it is not worthwhile getting into a discussion with them? Is it more than that? And in terms of the court cases, if you don't, Tim, is there ever going to be an end? Please unmute.
I like what Rhonda said, and I agree with it. But I have a few reservations. There are a few exceptions. First of all, I don't think she went far enough when she pointed out that the party in opposition, winner-take-all system, the party in opposition has nothing, and that's the party that calls for power sharing. So in the 70s, Cheddi Jagan called for power sharing and was ignored. By 1997, after Hoyt was out of power for 5 years, he called for power sharing. By then, of course, Cheddi was happily in power and was not so enamored with the concept of sharing that power. And after 23 years of PPP rule, you heard nothing about power sharing. In fact, the only time you had any mention of constitutional reform was after APNU protests on the road that led up to the 2000-2001 discussion. So when you're out, you talk power sharing. So I heard Juan Edghill there talking about PPP always ready to discuss and that kind of thing. But in 23 years, there wasn't much discussion. And at the time that he remarks, Barajagdio said to Mr. Harmon, let's talk, he was in opposition. I am going to wait and see. And let me make this observation. I spoke to Irfan Ali, and I am satisfied that he genuinely wants to do right. Now, it's one thing to be on the outside struggling to get into power and having good intentions. It's another thing when you have the power. We have to wait and see. But you don't break the law to accommodate somebody who has broken the law. And right now, like it or lump it, of the two parties who have monopolized our political landscape and rendered us second poorest to Haiti, one of them has won. As far as I'm concerned, they've won legitimately, and you don't break the rules. Mr. Ali needs to be sworn in. The PPP have won the election. And after that is done, after we followed our legal process, there needs to be a discussion that leads to the comfort of those 193,000 people who do not support the PPP, who see the PPP as looking after their own and not looking after them. Rightly or wrongly, it doesn't matter. 193,000 people in Guyana need to feel that they are represented in the power brokerage in the country. And there needs to be that discussion. If there is not, we are going to have another 50 years where we find ourselves, oil or no oil, still corrupt, still winner take all, still extreme hostility and polarization every election, all at the hands of the system that has got us here so far. It has to change.
Thank you very much. Good evening, lady and gentlemen. My question to you is: at what point in time do the people of, or do the political party says that this is where we draw the line, and what happens from there? What are some of the likely scenarios that are going to play out? It's starting with, of course, Bishop Juan Edghill, and then we move across. Bishop, you need to unmute your mic.
The first thing that needs to be established, a government should only be in place because it's legitimate. It means that you have won the hearts of the people and they have put you in the position of leadership to serve the entire country. How you act when you get there is why we have elections, because people are able to censor you for not carrying out their wishes. And that's one of the reasons why you have elections, and that's what democracy is all about. Over the last 5 years, there are some significant things that were done from the PPPC position that must not be ignored. Number one, the leader says we're underrepresented in our leadership by women. And it was a deliberate effort to engage the participation and involvement of women in politics. Secondly, he admitted publicly at one of his press conferences, we are underrepresented in the African Afro-Guyanese community. And we need to break down that wall where it would appear that the parties, the major parties, one is Afro-based and one is Indo-based. The PPPC has reformed itself. The results of the 2018 local government elections stands out to show the significant work and inroads that would have been done in Afro-Guyanese communities, where Afro-Guyanese have started giving us their votes. In the 2020 elections, there is no way that we could have won these elections without significant support coming from the Afro-Guyanese community. And we went to those elections with a commitment in our manifesto that we will pursue governance arrangements that will allow for inclusivity. We went to the elections with that commitment. So when Mr. Jonas says he spoke to Irfan Ali and he genuinely wants to do what is right, it was Irfan Ali's committing to him one-on-one like he committed to the entire nation. This manifesto is our program that we will implement. And in the implementation of that program, we will do what is necessary to be a government for all the people of Guyana. May I also remind Leonard, in direct response, the PPPC historically in negotiations have facilitated changes in the political landscape in Guyana. The whole construct of Parliament and how it operated prior to 2015, when they changed everything, the chairmanship of committees, the way the Parliamentary Management Committee is made up, all of that came out of a process of constitutional reform, political dialogue in the back room, consultations in the front room with the people, where you had a constitutional reform commission that was equally divided between the political actors and civil society. And we are saying, the PPPC, we're not angels, but we are people who have Guyana's good at heart. We have learned from our mistake. And if you recall, one of the things that Dr. Jagdeo would have said at one of his press conferences is that even if we win and when we win these elections, the fact remains is that the PNC has a constituency that must be engaged. And when we go into government, that's the way we intend to operate. The PNC has a constituency that must be engaged. Now, the whole discussion about shared governance and power sharing and all the rest of this must be taken in a particular context, that we have to build trust. I think it was Yog who earlier spoke about building trust. And let me remind all Guyanese, an effort was made at this in the 1994 era with the local government elections at City Hall, when there was the PNC, the GGG, and the PPP, with a position of the rotating mayorship. Ranwell Jordan got his turn. Hamilton Green got his turn. And when it was time for Philomena Sahai Shuri, the GGG and the PNC came together to ensure that the PPP never got its turn. So we really do have a trust issue. You can put all the formulas on the table, but we have to develop a framework and an architecture of building trust. We introduced in the 2001, 2006 era inclusion of the PNC and all state boards and their participation in governance of state boards. I was the chairperson of the Guyana Post Office Corporation. Oscar Clark, General Secretary of the PNC, served on that board with me, where decision making was made in a collective, how we govern these state entities. It was the beginning of building trust. But when you have dishonesty, when you have political blackmail, when you have bullyism, when you have downright fraud, lies, thuggery, how could you have an environment where people could sit at the table and really discuss and negotiate? That is why the first thing that needs to be done in this context, a declaration, the swearing in of the president, constituting of the parliament, getting Guyana back on track, and then mature political dialogue to ensure the development of Guyana. So it's not to dialogue, but not dialogue now. We have to conclude the electoral cycle. And I repeat for emphasis, you don't negotiate the results of an election. It is declared. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Rhonda, of course, to you, where is the line drawn in this entire affair, where it seems as if court cases are on and on and on?
That's a hard question to answer. I remember being on this show a few weeks ago, and I said we'd see a plethora of court cases. And Dr. Mahadeo smirked at me and he says, man, you know, we have to have faith. And here we are weeks later. And I can pretty much tell you that we will go to the CCJ again after Thursday's judgment. And pretty sure there's another court case that's going to come. Potentially, you know, a new private citizen will show up with a battery of Trinidadian senior counsel lawyers, and we'll go through this again. What the Guyanese people are is resilient. They are patient people. They are very mature. I've been in the field. I've talked to the man in the street, and as much as they're frustrated with the process, they understand what's happening. They see what's happening, and so they're willing to wait. And I think perhaps one of the strategies that the government, is attempting is to frustrate the opposition and the opposition parties into, we want it over, we want it finished with. Our people have to understand that this process has to play itself out, because, and I will tell you this, the ordinary man on the street is convinced at this point that if this process is not played out legally and all of the loopholes argued and fought for in the courtroom, we are going to have this scenario playing itself out over and over again when somebody doesn't like how the results go. So we're just going to have to wait it out. That's my position. And let the chips fall where they may. The APNU-AFC is, it seems that they want fresh elections. That process is going to take another 2 years. They're going to fight for a new list. They're going to fight for, the GECOM chair alone, the position will be another battle. So that is the strategy that I'm seeing. And I would say to the Guyanese people, that resilience that we're famous for, this is the time where we have to employ it. And we have to utilize all of the legal measures to ensure that the will of the people is represented in its current form. And after we get that declaration and there is an end to this electoral process, however legally we can fight it, that is what we will do. And that's just how it is. And so I would say to the Guyanese people, just wait. Every long rope, my mom used to say, every long rope has an end. It doesn't come when you want it to come, but ensure you're on the legal side, ensure you're on the moral side of that fight. And so at the end of the day, it's going to take patience, and our people have to use that resilience that they're famous for in waiting this process out and ensuring that we don't negotiate, as Bishop Edghill said earlier, elections results, and their will is thwarted because one party doesn't like the result.
Thank you very much, dear Council. Maybe you want to take a shot at that.
As your participants were speaking, I felt some discomfort because what I've realized is that we have a very strong, experienced PPP campaigner who is giving one side of the story, but the other evil twin is not here. And as you know, it's my view, we have two evil twins, not one. So I am forced into the position that I have to respond to some of the things that are said. You see, my friend Juan Edghill has a point. After the protests and after the unrest, some concessions were made during the PPP leadership. And you did see representation by a member of the opposition in some of these agencies, not all of them, some of them. But to talk about dialogue and to talk about inclusion and that kind of thing, it sounds nice, sounds flowery. Everybody, all the party loyalists certainly will say, oh, wonderful, look how we are open and our party looks after the whole country. But the thing is that every statement you make, the other side makes the same statement. So when you say we are here for all Guyanese, APNU says exactly the same thing. When you say we are an inclusive government, APNU says the same thing. We have two sides of the same coin. And here's the truth. Parliament does not work with a majority government, because if one side sits with 31 or 32 seats, they can talk until they're blue in the face. And after they finish talking, the majority will still pass the laws that they want to pass. And every parliamentary committee created, whether it's for constitutional reform or whether it's for some specific legislation, as long as the government side has a majority in that committee, the minority can talk until they're blue in the face. And at the end of the day, the legislation proposed by the majority will be passed by the majority. So to say we've appointed some token person on this board or some token person on that committee is as meaningless in any real sense of the word as a minority opposition in parliament, because you're wasting the taxpayers' money by even turning up. The government, if it has the majority, will pass the laws it wants to pass, and that is why I keep saying we have an elected dictatorship in our winner-take-all system as long as there are only two parties, because mathematically the party that wins the election has majority in parliament and therefore controls executive, controls parliament, and very soon will begin to exert influence on the judiciary. That is an elected dictatorship. It is what has put us in this mess. It is what has allowed corruption. It is what has allowed incompetence, because there is no accountability. There's no transparency. So that needs to change. We can't pay lip service to it anymore. We have to have a meaningful system of transparency and sharing so that the 193,000 people who did not vote PPP feel that they are fairly represented. It is dishonest to pretend that in elections in Guyana, the will of the people overwhelmingly puts some party in office. Because the truth is, in Guyana, everybody votes lesser of two evils. Nobody says, I endorse these policies of this party. Everybody says, them people over there worse. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the numbers, there is a small swing vote of 25,000 people in this country, maybe 30,000. Everybody else, come hell, high water, devil or Jesus Christ, will vote blind ethnic party loyalty. And you see that. The vote change in 2011, in 2015, and now in 2020 is 30,000 people. Everybody else voted the same way. So don't let's pretend that there's been some acclaim, some wonderful endorsement of one party over the other. There's been the lesser of two evils and a recognition that after 2015, when Guyanese had enough of the corruption, Guyanese realized they jumped from frying pan into fire. So lesser of two evils struck again, and those 30,000 people went back the other way with the minority, with the 10,000 who stayed with small parties. Mm-hmm. We are in an unhappy situation. The unhappy situation is caused by two evil twins, not one. It needs to change in a meaningful way. And I am waiting to see if that happens after the current mess we're in is resolved.
Thank you.
On that note, I mean, Bishop, I'm gonna have you respond as well. But on that note, Tim, we might be waiting beyond the age of His Excellency the President, and we might not see it happen because the truth is it that at some stage we may have to come to the realization that certain things are not going to change. Guyanese, by and large, may go with who they feel more comfortable with, a matter of who is going to make them more live a better life in their own eyes and stuff like that. It's open discussion. But Bishop, I'm going to ask you, of course, I'm going to give you to respond, but I want to also let us look at what is happening out there in the villages. As you know, Bishop, as of the last weekend, Ramjatan, Amna Ali, they all went out to the various villages in breach of the curfew, breach of the COVID-19 restrictions, of course. But their messages was to perpetuate the lie, was to perpetuate that they won the elections, was to perpetuate that everybody else is lying against them, the whole world. Now, Bishop, forget that. What do you and your party say to those people out there? They're the ones that we have to change.
Well, Yoke, thanks for asking. I would not pick a fight with Tim about his analysis. We understand Anog's platform. We have heard Anog loud and clear in the run-up to the elections. And as a third party, they have to make a case and justification for their existence. But when you look at democracies in the Westminster system, somebody wins an election and somebody loses, and countries go on. The peculiar circumstances of Guyana must be properly analyzed, and we must not fool ourselves into thinking that there is a quick fix. Ultimately, it is the people of Guyana that determines who they want to lead the process of government in their country. I sat in the parliament as an MP, and I would like to inform Tim and other viewers and listeners, the opposition makes changes. You go to parliamentary select committees, bills come, and when it get down there, because of intelligent, justifiable argument, whoever's the government recognizes and makes the changes. Yes, the Public Accounts Committee, chaired by whoever's in opposition, holds the government feet to the fire, can expose the wrongdoings. So Parliament is not a lost case once it is allowed to function properly and managed in keeping with the reforms that have been made. So I needed to say that. But here it is, we went to 2020 elections with some rules. The party that gets the most votes, whether it's a majority or a plurality, gets the presidency. And the party that gets the majority in the National Assembly controls the legislature. We went to the elections with those rules. APNU played those rules with 4,000 votes more than the PPPC in 2015. They behaved as if the PPPC didn't exist. They lost an election. 15,000 plus Guyanese said, we prefer the PPPC to lead our developmental process. based upon their manifesto, based upon their team. And in your manifesto, you promise to engage all stakeholders. So we're going to hold your feet to the fire. Why is it that the APNU-AFC don't want to relinquish power, displaying to the world their democratic credentials so that we can move Guyana forward? You know why? Because they know they don't have good intentions. If they had good intentions, 2015 to 2018, 2019, they would have engaged. They never engaged. They behaved like if they were the only ones there. A fresh approach, our time now, a new season. Your 23 years finish. That was the language. That was the level of the debate. And I sit here tonight with you, Tim, Rondha, and all the others to say there is no way that the PPPC is going into government to say, APNU, PNC, you did it for 5 years and left us out. We are going to banish you. We have said openly the PNC has a constituency that must be engaged, and we will engage them. The smaller parties, the NGOs, the religious organizations, the labor movement, they must be engaged. And if you check the records, whether it was a low carbon development strategy, whether it was a national development strategy, whether it was the poverty reduction strategy, paper 1 or paper 2, the PPPC at the helm of government dialogued, engaged, and consulted widely.
Right.
There were those who didn't want to participate.
So
now, I want to go to your second part, Yogi, of what is happening in our country now. It is my belief that on Thursday, with the arguments of distinguished men like Timothy Jonas and Ralph Ramkaran and the other attorneys that represented the PPPC, that the Court of Appeal is left with one choice, and that is to unanimously, a unanimous decision to dismiss the APNU-AFC appeal. It is because of that expectation that they're going on the ground in the communities to create cells for instability and mischief, to buttress what they're saying at the high altar, dialogue, because they know if they make the country unstable, ungovernable, people are uncertain, fearful, the cry will be, y'all sit down and talk and work out an accommodation. And that is why I call it blackmail, political blackmail. So the activities of the last days over the weekend, continuing last night and today, it is to create a platform for either of two things. To call for a state of emergency, or to force the winner of these elections to come to the table to extract concessions, to negotiate a declaration as against having a declaration and then having mature political dialogue. But the good thing about it, their attempts to create that buzz in the communities did not succeed. Linda and they were there Monday night. I had said 40 attended based on the information that came to me. But one of their own operatives called to tell me, you were wrong. It was 49. And I sincerely apologize for the 9 that was not counted. But if you win 16,000 plus votes in Region 10, And you went there with your narrative of misinformation, lies. You sat on the television, you sat on the radio in the community, and then you got to meet the people face to face. And 49 people showed up, and most of the 49 are people who are employed and depend upon the state for their livelihood. Then you know the people of Guyana, they are not buying this narrative, and they're not going to allow the political blackmail. So I expect after Thursday, with a dismissal of the APNU-AFC's appeal, that the GECOM chairman take a position that says, I will not continue to sit handicapped.
Let's come to that. Let's come to the chairman position just now, Bishop, because that is a question I would like to go around the table, next steps and what we think the chairman should or should not do. Rhonda, the Bishop raises a specter there that I think has been in what we have been discussing so far. And that is that if you recall a couple of weeks back, APNU-AFC took hailers and they went around the community and they were telling the community this thing about fraud is fraud, and they carried all the numbers, and I believe they used the Guyana Chronicle to print out because it was on newspress, the kind of paper it was printed on, those numbers, pamphlets that they shared out. The numbers that didn't add up, of course, even on the pamphlets, as you know. That happened then, and as of this weekend, they had another outreach. Bishop's theory is that they are creating a situation for potential unrest. I mean, we cannot say it is so, but there seems to be a potential for that where they're telling people, because indeed, former parliamentarian, I think your colleague, Bishop, Mr. Figueroa, I think the words that he used at Linden yesterday would have purported to say, we'll never give up, we'll never, that kind of thing. We have the recording and we can play it at some stage. But Rhonda, is it therefore a setup for civil resistance if the court does not rule in this particular way? And where then does it place the political stakeholders in a call for negotiation?
I listened to the comments that Mr. Figueroa, it depends on, I didn't hear all of it. I wasn't present for the context. And as a teacher, I always like to listen to the context. What I've seen over the last 5 months is a backing into a corner. You sold to your supporters a narrative, that you won these elections, you won by, 15,000 non-existent votes, those kinds of things. So what you have to do at this point is to continue with that narrative. You can't back down now and say something different. So without the full context of Mr. Figueroa's utterances, I could see how it could be considered, call to arms in that sense. However, there is no other route that the APNU-AFC coalition could take at this point. You have sung this narrative for months, and you cannot go back to your supporters and say to them, well, we were wrong, or, we lost, in fact. So what you're seeing is a doubling down and a doubling back to positions. For instance, I've seen over the last couple of days, the attacks on the international community, calling them partisan. And interestingly enough, they're quoting 236,000 votes, a figure that isn't even supported by the ballot box recount. It's 15,000 votes that does not exist. So what you have is literally a dogged approach to this position that you took 5 months ago, that the recount has since disproven, but you can't do anything else. So you have to find creative ways to ensure that you keep that base in that, that moral sense of we've been wronged, and these are the things that have to happen. So again, without the full context, I'd let it slide as just rallying your base. However, the reality of it is we can't change that. We can't go back to changing because then we have to answer to our supporters. These were blatant lies that were told to them. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what you're seeing, all of these, meetings And I looked at the room and it was very scant for, given the fact that, the kind of support base the larger parties enjoy. And what you're seeing literally is a doubling down. You can't say anything else but what you've been saying for 5 months. And because over time, they're independent persons who can disprove that, who can say this didn't happen, that didn't happen. You have to get creative. And in the creativeness, starts to get sloppy. And at the same time as well, it gets more desperate. And so what you're hearing, especially from, especially with that clip that we saw today, was that the sounding of desperation. Because what you have, the first initial visa sanctions have hit. There is I saw an article in Kaieteur the other day, 100 plus countries, calling for a resolution based on the recount. And so you're entering into no man's land. There are not very many persons on your side except your support base. And little by little, they're starting to not believe this story that you're saying, except for, those persons who are diehards and in that sense. So you have to get creative. You have to do certain things. And that's what we're seeing.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. Rhonda, if you don't mind, quickly, I've noticed especially over the last week, a lot of attacks on no other than Chief Justice Roxanne George, and a lot of attacks on the Chairman Claudette Singh. I have heard the silence has been loud, very loud, coming from the persons who would have come out in defense of words and attacks on women before. We have you here, so I need to take advantage of your presence here. What's your thoughts on the attacks? I'm going to ask him to comment on the attack on the judiciary, but from your perspective, as a mother, as a woman, what's your thoughts on the attack on these two?
Some of the worst attacks that I have seen unleashed during this session, during this entire period, it always is unleashed on the women. I've faced the brunt of it. At one point, down to my minor children were used. So the attacks on, Justice Bihari, the chair, the Chief Justice, all of that, even Justice Barnes, because when she's not she didn't rule how the PPP supporters wanted her to rule, and so she would have also faced that kind of criticism. It is not anything new. Any woman joining a political realm or is considered a powerhouse is going to face that. Interestingly, though, what I've discovered in this country is that if you are not for me, you are against me, and therefore I'm going to remain very silent. So when the GECOM chair was being attacked for what seemed at the time to be partisan APNU-AFC positions, I opened my mouth, but other persons kept very quiet, especially on the PVP side. Then the positions flipped. And so, she's sounding, according to APNU-AFC supporter, she's sounding exactly like, for instance, the GECOM chair, sounding exactly like she's pro-PPP. And so she's now the darling of the PPP, but not the darling of APNU-AFC. So these are unfortunate things that happen for women. Nothing is going to change. It requires a change in a mindset that does not exist in this country, and it probably doesn't exist the world over. As women who are considered political leaders, who are considered powerhouses, we're in a man's world, we're going to face it. And so one of the first things that I think any woman in this realm is going to understand is that depending on the position they take, they're going to have naysayers and they're going to have persons who support them. So at this point, there is a full hypocrisy happening in this country. I can't call it anything else. We don't support those who don't support us. And therefore, at the end of the day, what it boils down to, not because she's a woman like me, not because, I have to stand in solidarity with my gender, but at the end of the day, right is right, wrong is wrong. And if you operate on principle, you will understand that these attacks are coming because of partisanship. And therefore, if you're operating on principle, you will condemn one and all, whether or not that person is on your side allegedly or not. So at the end of the day, any woman in this realm understands that. Any judge understands that. But we reserve our harshest criticism, we reserve our worst criticism and our worst attacks for women. And this is not only women in a political sphere. This is any woman who finds themselves in a position of power and they have to exert power and one side doesn't agree with them.
Thank you. The attacks on the judiciary has been aired over the state television, state media. There are persons who hold public office. Let me repeat, there are persons who hold public office being paid by taxpayers' money that have been on the forefront of APNU-AFC's airtime. And they have voiced some vicious attacks on the judiciary. And I was happy to see no other than Nigel Hughes. And I think as of 2 days ago, Comrade Ramjatan would have come out and said, hey, a word of caution, you don't need to attack. But Tim, I want to quote to you, Madam Roxanne George's powerful statement. A party cannot be complicit in the perpetuation of an illegality and cry foul when things go wrong. Mr. Tim Jonas, this attack on the judiciary as a man who's part of the legal association, the legal fraternity in Guyana, what are your thoughts, sir, and what's your advice?
At the end of the day, Guyanese have been so embittered and have become so callous from 50 years of hard times, 50 years of oppression, that we don't trust anybody. We're suspicious of everybody. So Rhonda is talking about Claudette Singh, and I agree with her that at the outset it looked as if Claudette Singh was backing the incumbent, and she got a royal cuss down from the PPP loyalists. And now it begins to look like she's backing the opposition. She gets a royal cuss down from the incumbent loyalists. We have that bad habit. We have, for some reason, I don't know if it is a heritage from slavery and indentureship, but we have lost sight of the best British export, which is chivalry. And we have become amoral and grubbing. There's some concepts that can't go away. You have to be fair. You have to be honest. You have to look after the people weaker than you. You have to help the poor if you can. You have to do the right thing. And if the truth is against you, you still have to acknowledge the truth. And there's so many of those things we don't do. There's a famous Guyanese, there's a thing Guyanese say, I ain't got time for that. And that expression, I ain't got time for that, is the go-to refrain when you choose not to do the right thing. Why you didn't stop at the stoplight? I ain't got time for that. Why you didn't pick up that old lady? I ain't got time for that. And it resonates through our whole society. Right now, half of the country knows their party lost and they are down. And if you ask them about doing the right thing and what Mingo did, they ain't got time for that. And in 2015, half of the country knew that the party they loyally support is corrupt. And if you ask them about exploring it and examining it, I ain't got time for that. So Rhonda's right. And part of our problem when we succumb to this need to vent in anger and frustration is that we do so against the people we see as being unable to react, the people who we see as weaker, as unable to defend themselves. And unfortunately, judges can't come out and comment. Judges have to remain on their pinnacle, on their soapbox. They have to remain separate. So they can't answer back. And therefore they're seen as free game. Women seen as easy game because they're not in a position, often financially, socially, in terms of physical strength, to answer back. And it is one of the uglier aspects of our society. It's a sickness in our society that each of us needs to look internally to fix. We can't point fingers at other people and say other people do it. Because so far I've seen both sides guilty of that horrible nastiness. And it's a personal thing. It needs to change.
Right. Tim, just before I go to Bishop for his comment, I have two questions for you, Bishop. But Tim, I want to come back to you. Tim, is there a likelihood in Tim Jonas's mind that the chairman could say it's time to take control of this circus and it's time to make a call? Or is she going to deflect again and say, let's wait to see if somebody's going to go to the CCJ?
There's only so much deflecting you can do. At some point, a decision has to be made. I personally believe that there is no way in this lifetime that Keith Lowenfield is going to submit a report according to his lawful obligation that gives PPP 33 seats and gives APNU 31 seats and gives the joinder 1 seat. I don't see that happening in this lifetime. So I think that Justice Singh has got to see that reality and has got to accommodate it, make provision for it, and deal with it. Because if she pretends that Lowenfield is going to be convinced, is going to find religion when Sunday comes, because we know that we've got a long weekend ahead, and is going to do the right thing, I don't think she's that naive. She's a very sensible, wily, experienced lady, but she needs, at this stage, in my view, to have the news to make provision for the eventuality. I don't even want to say eventuality, for the inevitability that Lowenfield will once cannot do his job and will need to be replaced, and she needs to have somebody to replace him.
Bishop, same question to you first, sir. What does, I can ask you safely, I think, and you would know how to respond. What is the party's hope that would happen following Thursday's decision by the COA where GECOM is concerned?
Well, you're going to answer that, but please give me 30 seconds.
Sure.
To say that the PPPC as a party nowhere stands for the ridiculing, vilification, or ostracizing of anyone because of the political office or the high office that they hold. That is why you would have heard the leader, Dr. Mahadeo, saying at his press conferences to our supporters, stay away from racism, stay away from hate. We have enough arguments to make our case. Our politics is about issues, not personalities. And while it is true, and I apologize for that there might be people who voted and supported the PPP would have said things on Facebook and elsewhere. I don't think you could point your fingers to any one of our candidates or leaders who have gone on such a rampage. And if they did, they were not sanctioned at any time because of the principles by which we operate. The difference that we have today is that this vulgarity is not just coming from the rank and file. It is coming from public figures, candidates to the poll, people who are expected to become leaders and MPs in our society, attacking people in such a manner. So there's a big difference. Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to what we believe should happen, and this is, I said a little earlier, I believe because of the good arguments of the Timothy Jonas and the Kaieteur Cans, I listened to these guys, Douglas Mendes and all the others who argued these cases last week before the Court of Appeal. Any rational mind would expect that the judges will be convinced that the APNU-AFC don't have a case. The one change that I would like to see, I think we in the PPPC would like to see, is that when the Court of Appeal grants its verdict that retired Justice Singh understands the framework and the political architecture that we are in and the positions that she has adopted, that is to say, I'll sit and wait until the next appeal is being heard. would not be in the best interest of Guyana, because that is using the judiciary, abusing process, and using the judiciary to hold on to power. The matters that are being ventilated, the Chief Justice, in a very pellucid manner, spoke to this nation by way of the judgment that she gave. APNU supporters heard it. And I believe the Court of Appeal will do similar. If they don't, well, the judicial process will continue and all the rest of it. But I believe it's time for action on the part of GECOM, because there was no injunction. It was an undertaking that was made. And Timothy will advise me that an undertaking in law is the same as an injunction, because it's the party voluntarily imposing restrictions upon themselves as against the court imposing those restrictions. I believe Justice retired Cornet Singh needs to understand where we are and needs to act in her own deliberate judgment to bring this matter to an end, and to do so swiftly. I don't believe she needs to be pressured. I don't believe that she needs to be manipulated. I don't believe that she needs to be bullied. I believe that she needs to have a clear mind, acting under what she has committed to this nation to do, to follow the law and to follow the Constitution. We cannot allow this vicious cycle of unending abuse of the judiciary to delay an election to continue. And I believe, as a former judicial officer, now a constitutional office holder, she's able to weigh those matters evenly to understand the kinds of actions that needs to be taken.
Right. Thank you. And Bishop, just to come back to you a little bit. Sorry, Rhonda, I'm going to come to you in a minute. Leonard, Gildarie, and yours truly, we have been on radio every day from 1:30 to 4, and we have received a number of calls, Bishop. A number of persons have called in, and they have expressed great concerns that that they cannot perceive or conceive a situation where they can accept a PPP government. They're this big fear. Whether it's perception or reality, we'll have to keep that for another discussion. But there is this fear in a number of persons across this country, especially Afro-Guyanese persons, that have called into our program and say that they're fearful of going back to those days. Bishop, what would be your response to them then? And wouldn't it be bad to now say, well, you know, we won and that's it, accept it, because then that's not in good faith? What do you say to those persons who would have called in, especially expressing an Afrocentric, Afro-Guyanese concern, sir?
Well, Yog, as a Guyanese, I understand that view, because whatever fills you controls you. The APNU-AFC did not go to the elections telling this nation, like us, because we're going to do A, B, and C. They went to these elections saying, hate the PPP because of what they would have done. That was their campaign. So their supporters are not in the mode of, well, you didn't get through, let's allow the other person to do what they have to do, and hopefully that we can bring all the people together and have some amount of cooperation or some modus vivendi that they can find an accommodation to get the platform of all sides on the table, because it is good for Guyana. They are concerned not about the development of Guyana, but that diet of hate that they have been fed is affecting them. Now, what we in the PPPC have to take responsibility for and do is to go out there and convince them, number one, we are not the demons they told you that we are. We are human beings. We have made mistakes, but not everything they said was true. There was a campaign of misinformation. There was a campaign of lies and deception. But this is what we're going to do. Our arms are open, not for you to necessarily join and become a member of the PPPC, but talk to us, engage us, so that we can hear you, feel you, understand you, so we can bring the kind of development to you and your community to ensure that there's equality of opportunity and access. And our position is that I don't believe we have done the best job of getting our message out before this 2020 campaign. One of the faults of the PPPC is that we did not aggressively answer some of those lies and misinformation. And we said, we know it's not true, and we were dismissive. But in the 2020 campaign, we answered the issue of the 400 plus black men that allegedly that was killed. We answered the issue of the discrimination against one village and another village. We answered the issues of the hate that was being sold in the whisper campaigns coming from the PPPC base. And because of that, check our list, check the votes in some of the areas where we never used to get support. Afro-Guyanese are reading, they are listening, they are understanding, and it's just a matter of time for more of them to be able to say, well, we didn't win, but let's give them a chance and let's see what they will do. And we are saying to our Afro-Guyanese, PNC, APNU supporters, it is true that you have your loyalty to the PNC. Traditionally, culturally, you are tied to some of these things. But we in the PPPC, we are committed to sitting with you, listening to you, working with you, and advancing programs, projects, and policies that will benefit you and all Guyanese as we transform Guyana and bring the new wave of prosperity. So that will be the message that I will give to them.
Thank you, Bishop. And I would like to invite you and maybe Mr. Nandlal to join me any day of your choice to discuss that same accusation of the numbers. I think Paula Lawrence said it was 500,000 people that were killed. I know that the gentleman from US have been pushing a number of 1,400 people. I know the Stabroek News carried an article representing 400 odd numbers. I know that Mr. Selwyn Peters joined our program recently, and he said extrajudicial killing continues up to today. And so I would like us to have an open discussion in room 592, sir. It's an open invitation to you and Mr. Nandlal, a day of your choice, hopefully sooner rather than later, so we can really address this. And when we have that program, Leonard, we are going to take calls. It's going to be an open program with the Guyanese people. So Bishop, I'm going to leave that word with you for us to discuss how we can arrange that. Rhonda, I want to come back to this negotiation, no negotiation, because here on, I rather suspect that Thursday, APNU would have to come up with a brand new narrative, and they're probably thinking about it as we speak. What's the narrative they're going to play out from Thursday after the Court of Appeals decision, and especially the chess moves that would be in play if Claudia Singh decides to proceed. Rhonda, from a concrete or a concise position, are you saying that your political view is no to negotiation until the legitimate government is sworn in?
pretty much. What we are dealing with is, like I said, I've been saying all night, we don't get to change the rules in the middle of the game. And we have been seeing that those attempts at rule changing all the way from the no confidence motion rolling all the way down. There are sections of the population who believe that, these chess moves started just after the elections, when Mingo produced those two sets of declarations, which Lord knows where he got it from. However, what we've seen repeatedly from the no confidence motion onwards, and even with the selection of the unilateral selection of the GECOM chair initially, what you had were attempts to play chess with our constitution. And so that pattern has consistently occurred. It started with the appointments of the GECOM chair. It continued throughout after the no confidence motion. And 5 months after the elections have been completed, 2 months after a national recount, where the most important interlocutor was discredited. At that point, what you had was, and then of all of these multiple court cases of private citizens with sudden access to Trinidadian senior counsels, which would cost a pretty penny. What we've had is a public, I'm abiding by the Constitution, and then quietly slipping up the courtroom steps to drop another bombshell of court cases on us. So at this point, I have not seen anything that would suggest we've had good faith negotiations even within. And I'll give the example of the recount. Publicly, I'm abiding by the whatever the recount says. It was said to Prime Minister Mia Mottley as well, send your team. That first team that came left unceremoniously because we rushed up the courtroom steps again. And, we use the term of a private citizen. So I have seen nothing that would allow me to think that any kind of negotiations, any kind of conversations would be held in good faith. And therefore, I take it with a grain of salt, as we say in Guyana. However, there is that, at the end of the day, we have to abide by our Constitution. And our Constitution is very clear on the procedure for this. And therefore, at this point, let's talk after. If you want to talk, sure, let's talk about how we can end this process, get a declaration finished, get who the people want in power, and then we can have a conversation about how we can begin to make the changes that are necessary for this country to move forward. And we cannot have a situation every 5 years where half of the population, and I keep saying half of the population, because as Tim mentioned earlier, that small band of persons who voted for the third parties, in fact, sometimes I feel it is that group of 10,000 persons, 9,000 plus, who are literally holding us back from the abyss. So at the end of the day, I've seen nothing that tells me we would have negotiations in good faith. And secondly, we don't get to play with the one thing that we're supposed to be abiding by, the Constitution. And therefore, we have to follow those rules. We don't get to change them midway. And therefore, my position as it is right now is that let's get to a declaration, install who we need to install as per the will of the people, and then let's talk.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And ladies and gentlemen, we are about the bottom of our program, I would say. Almost at that time. We got 2-3 minutes to go. Tim, your closing thoughts, sir.
Bishop, just to come back to you a little bit. Sorry, Rondha-Ann.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Yoga. I'm hearing feedback. Is
Yes,
there
it's clear.
someone else talking?
No, it's fine. Thanks.
Oh, okay. At the end of the day, the Guyanese public has seen what the winner-take-all system does in the desperation of both sides in this election. The pendulum has swung. At one instance, it appeared the incumbent would be sworn in. He had his presidential honor guard waiting. Now the pendulum has swung. It looks as if the fraud will not work and Mr. Ali will be sworn in. But in the meantime, while that pendulum was swinging, in the fight that went on, in the court litigation, in the protests outside Ashman's building, in the recount at the conference center, in the plethora of media discussions and interviews and all of that, Guyanese have seen how the two-party system push us to the brink because they realize this isn't the first time. 5 years ago, you had PPP representatives protesting outside GECOM when they learned that they had lost. 5 years before that, you had more protests when Gokul tried to steal a seat. 5 years before that, you had such severe protests that constitutional reform was negotiated, although it happened in a lackluster and meaningless way. Every 5 years, we have the cycle of violence, the cycle of hostility, the cycle of problems because of the winner-take-all system, because the party that is out is out. It has nothing. Its followers are desolate and feel abandoned, and they are justified. Right now, if you look at a Prado driving down the road, chances are an Afro-Guyanese is driving it. 5 years ago, if you looked at that Prado driving down the road, chances are an Indo-Guyanese was driving it. This sense of being ostracized and left out, if you look at who's doing the contracts, who's cutting the grass, who's getting the government contracts, there's an ethnic base. It is not imagined, it is real, and it is on both sides. Now, I've heard Juan Edghill talk about the PPP distances itself from these unsavory comments by its supporters. And the PPP believes that it must represent all the parties and is reaching out. David Granger created a whole Ministry of Social Cohesion and said that he, for the first time, there's how many members forming this coalition representing the cross-section of the society, blah, blah, blah. Noise is talk and talk is hot air.
Right.
And
right.
From a friend, Juan Edghill's voice, it's clear he's done a lot of talking recently. But dialogue and engagement and talk and talk and talk is all well and good. It's time we have a meaningful change. And I'm waiting to see it happen. I have hope that the PPP will make it happen and will not once again dilute it when they begin to enjoy the fruit of their winner-take-all victory.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Jonas. It's been a pleasure to have you here. Ladies and gentlemen, the Labor and Justice Party, Mr. Lennox Schumann. Remember, he was supposed to have been here tonight, but he's unfortunately unable to come. He had to go visit some of the communities. And so he has been listening. And Mr. Schumann, our respect and regards to you and the community you are in, sir. Mr. Schumann has said that the LJP is not open to negotiations with a dictatorship. Any such negotiation only serves to legitimize that dictatorship, and we will not support any dictatorship. After the elections are concluded, we are open to dialogue on moving Guyana forward in a comprehensive and inclusive way. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are at the conclusion of our program. Bishop, 30 seconds, sir. Please unmute. 15 seconds gone.
Well, you do not negotiate an election's results. Let's get the declaration. Let's get the president sworn in and hold our feet to the fire to bring Guyana together, to unite Guyana, to have a government that works for all the people of Guyana. Hold us accountable.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And Ms. Rondha-Ann, we had you start the program as the first contributor, and we're certainly going to close the program with you as our final contributor. Your closing thoughts, ma'am. 30 seconds.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, we are heading into, I'm pretty sure, some new rounds of court cases. And so I'm going to urge every single Guyanese to just allow the process to weigh itself out. We have to have, a finality to it. The Chief Justice has said this over and over again, but it's how we do things in Guyana. And so I would urge all Guyanese just to have a little bit more patience. It's going to end. I can't tell you when, but it will end. And at that point, we will have to at this point, race relations, I would have to say, is at its lowest in this country. It hasn't manifested, thankfully. Only the fight is only in the courts, and I hope it remains there. And so I'd urge all sides of the coin to be calm and to just let the court cases play out. It will end.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let us thank on your behalf Ms. Rondha-Ann, Mr. Timothy, Jonas, and Bishop Juan Edghill for joining us in room 592 tonight. The consensus is that we are not going to negotiate under duress. We are not going to negotiate these election results. There has to be the swearing in of a legitimate government, and then, as maybe priority number one, discussions need to start thereafter about governance and government and shared governance and all of the things that everybody wants as maybe the priority of the new government, but it must follow the swearing in of a legitimate government. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to have you all here in room 592 tonight. Tomorrow night, we are going to have Sir Ron Saunders talking to us about what's happening at the OAS front and the CARICOM front and the wider world as Guyana looks towards, well, it's not that we are looking forward, but obviously we're looking towards a second round of sanctions being discussed in the international community, and it doesn't place us in good light at all. So ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you all once again. Remember, say a prayer for this beautiful country of ours. It is still the best place in the world. And do be safe. Have a great night. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Tim.
One
Thanks, Sean.
stable.
Good night, everybody.